Assalamu alaikum students. Today our lecture is about another very important um, section related to our environmental laws and policies, and it is about the standards. These standards which we have prepared are all related to our those tools which will be used for the implementation of our laws, and these laws are prepared in the guideline of our Environmental Act 1997. Initially, we have an ordinance in 1983, and that ordinance was simply related to some of the very basic needs. And then we further developed the policy in 1992, and then based on that policy, standards were developed. Those standards were mostly related with noise and related with drinking water, and furthermore, the gaseous emissions were also part of that. Then another version of those standards was revised in 1995, and it was approved, and then 1996 it was implemented. Furthermore, these all standards were uh, improved and revised in the year 2000, and those uh, mm, standards were considered as more nearer to the other standards which were existing at that time. For example, WHO standards, for example, US EPA standards. So these all things will be discussed in this lecture. And so for standards, first of all, as I have referred to one of the books titled as Environmental Legislation and Institutions in Pakistan. So this book, book chapter 15 is related to these standards, and actually this standard is more like its connection with the act. So what act says, and how it depicts the standards, and on the basis of those sections, how the Environmental Protection Agency developed these standards. If you go through our website of the Ministry of Climate Change, you can observe that there is a huge list of the rules and regulations which are developed, and all those rules and regulations are falling under the um, this Act 1995, sorry, 1997. So, but what actually is important, that all those acts are the need based acts which are under the control of the act, which are defined within the boundary of the act. So these standards are again falling within the boundary of the act. How it is falling within the boundary of the act, I will just present it in front of you. The, like, this is the section 6 of Environmental Protection Act 1997. If you have a look at it, so it defines the functions of the federal agency. So federal agency of Pakistan Protection Agency, Pakistan Environmental Protection Agency. So if you see here, it has um, so many duties assigned here, like the federal agency shall. So instead of studying all that, you just move directly to this sub clause E, and you can find it prepare or revise and establish the national environmental quality standards with approval of the council, provided that before seeking approval of the council, the federal agency shall publish the proposed national environmental quality standards for public opinion in accordance with the prescribed procedure. So this is something which was the base of developing and revising, preparing the national environmental quality standards, because it was one of the functions of this function of the federal agency. So at this time, when we had all the um, responsibilities under this federal uh, Pakistan Environmental Protection Agency, we used to have national environmental quality standard, which were only related to the uh, Pak EPA federal. So federal government was responsible to approve it. So one modification, which major modification, was took place when this environment was shifted to the provincial level. So why it was shifted to provincial level, we have studied it as well, but it was, the basic reason was because every area has its own significant parameters to be investigated. So it needs a particular and specified criteria for any parameter to be investigated. For example, in some cases we have more uh, more chances of the rock fragments and rock pollution, subsoil pollution. In that case, in the areas which are enriched with the minerals in their soil, and they need to have a different criteria to address these issues. In those areas which are more nearer to the sea level, sea shore, those are mostly concerned with the issues related to sea and sea water and sea pollution. So they need to develop rules and regulations based on their own issues and local issues which are more significant in that area only. So federal government is not going to look after those local based issues. In that uh, in view of that, this environmental organizations were handed over to the provinces so that they can cater for their own issues which are locally being taking place. So some other issues like rocks and their pollution, and some coal related issues in the areas where we have coal mines. So in some areas we have air pollution due to the uh, heavy industries, so that they need to handle their own issues. And similarly in some of the south we have some specific issues related to our deserts, and some habitat, and some species which are being getting extinct, and they are no more available, so we need to address them on their local basis. So in that view, the province was to cater for its own issues, environmental issues. Therefore, um, the provincial environmental protection agencies were held responsible to develop and revise their own environmental issues. So if you see the Ministry of Climate Change website, you will find that there is only availability of the act, the standards up to the year 2000 when it was revised, and then it was revised in 2010 as well for some noise pollution issues. We will see it in the coming slides. But later on, when this was this issue was transferred and allocated to the provincial government to look after. In that case, the provincial environmental protection department and agency was uh, uh, required to revise the standards. So now those standards are uh, and not declared as NEQS, but they are PEQS, so that the provincial environmental quality standards can be developed and they should be implemented in that particular area to cater for the local needs. So if we continue checking the source, you can see that the section 6 and it's the clause 1 and subclause E, F and G of the Pakistan Environmental Protection Act 1997 provides the functions of federal agency, which are as follows. We have already seen it in the previous slides. So here it's only for your revision, and it is kind of summary that first of all, to prepare, establish and revise the national environmental quality standards, and then to ensure its implementation of the NEQS, and then establish the standards for the quality of the ambient air, water and land by notification in the official gazette. So this is the function of the federal agency. So it was before the transferring of the powers to the federal to the provincial uh, environmental protection agencies. So these are some of the limits that different standards for discharge or emission from different sources and for different areas and conditions may be specified. So this is what we were talking, where standards are less stringent than the national environmental quality standards. Prior approval of the council may be obtained, and then certain areas with the approval of the council may exclude from carrying out the specific activities or projects from the application of such standards. So such standards can find out if the uh, if the project is not fulfilling the requirements of these standards. In that case, that project can be stopped or modified, or its nature can be changed. So something like this can be done in this case. So here, what standard actually means. So we have its definition in the section 2 of Environmental Protection Act. So the qualitative and quantitative standards for discharge of effluent and wastes, and for emission of air pollutants and noise, either for general applicability or for a particular area, or from a particular production process, or for a particular product, and includes the national environmental quality standards, emission standards and other standards established under this act. Now, the Environmental Protection Act 1997 defines the national environmental quality standards under the section 2 as follows. So the standards established by the federal agency under clause E of subsection 1 of section 6 and approved by the council under clause C of subsection 1 of section 4. So just check the application and utility of the act. So the purpose to show all these things in this slide is to see how these things are interconnected and associated with each other and supplementing each other, and you can check the significance how our act is being implemented. So this is the act which says that in section 6 and subsection 1 and then clause E as mentioned here, this these standards are supposed to be prepared, and what criteria and what uh, section of the act is going to get it approved. You can see it in the section 4. So section 4 says something about the function and powers of the council. And which council we are talking about? It is the Pakistan Environmental Protection Council, PEPC. So this PEPC is under the class C of subsection 1 of section 4 is going to get it approved. So if you can read it here, function and powers of the council, and just check the section 1, and this in this subsection it is described in the clause C as the council shall approve the national environmental quality standards. So the approval is under this section 4, while its preparation is under the section 6. So this is the application of it. So it's very important to understand how these things are interconnected. Now here are something about the rules and regulations. These rules are again under the influence of the Environmental Protection Act. So in the same way as we described it here, in this slide, you can observe that all these rules and regulations being developed by the Pakistan Environmental Protection Agency Federal are under the influence of the Act 1997. So you can have an overview of all the rules being implemented and being developed by this agency. So starting from this one in the year 2016, handling, manufacture and storage, import of hazardous waste and hazardous substance rules. You know, it's very well defined in our act. So may I ask which section is going to control these rules? Which section is going to give us the scope and the boundaries of these rules? Under which section we are going to develop this rule? So please again have a look at your act, and just you will get a very simple answer which section is going to control it. Similarly, compounding of the offences and payment of administrative penalty rules, October 2015. So these are again in very clearly explained in this Act 1997. So based on the scope and the responsibilities given in that act, these rules were developed by the federal agency. Again, I will request you to check which section it is going to follow. So it's very clearly demonstrated in the act that these payment and penalties and for the compounding of the offenses are under which section they fall. So we have talked about it in detail in our previous lectures. Similarly, we have this NEQS, which are the revised and for water, drinking water and noise, and it is in the year 2010. And then we have NEQS for motor vehicles 2009, and hospital waste management rule 2005, biosafety rules in 2005, and then provincial sustainable development fund and its utilization rules. And again, you are very much clear about it, that which section of the act is going to rule it, going to define it, and have the scope clarified by which section. Hazardous substances and rules 2003, it's again very obvious So pollution charts of for industries, its calculations and how to calculate the uh, industry and to the stakeholders, and even the government, if the government organizations are involved, who will be the responsible person, how the penalties will be imposed, and how these rules will be enforced. All these are mentioned in the section. So my question to you is, please associate all these rules with the specific sections of the act. Similarly, we have other rules in this. You can go through every rule and you can go into the details. All these rules will be very much helpful to you while working in the field, while working as an environmental engineer. So what are your jurisdictions? What are the jurisdictions of the stakeholders? What are the jurisdiction and limitation of the owners, and how they are being provided safety by the some rules of the act. So then we have some tribunal rules as well, and here are some of the regulations. We have very clearly demonstrated the difference between the rules and regulations in the previous lectures. Particularly, the regulations were for mentioned for the while we were talking about EIA and IEE, and we have some very specific rules and regulations for that as well. So you are requested to go through all these links, and I also have requested you earlier to go into the details and get these regulations worked out. So once again I will request you to go through them. Well, if you feel comfortable, we have 16 rules and 6 regulations. So please, every student can have one rule or regulation based on his registration number. So starting from the roll number 1 having the rule 1, and roll number 2 having the rule 2. Similarly, in the same sequence you may go through it, and then in the next lecture we will be having our discussion on these things, and I will request you to have your input and give me your views about them, what you found and what is the scope of it. And it will be much better if you write them in your handwriting in 1 page or 2 pages, so that we can have a much fruitful discussion on it. Well, some of the examples I have quoted here. So, for example, this is the uh, uh, NEQS, which were firstly developed in the year 1993. And if you read this notification, it is in pursuance of the powers conferred by Clause D of Section 6 of Pakistan Environmental Protection Ordinance 1983, and based on it the approval of council here establishes the national environmental quality standards in the annexures. So every annexure is going to represent a particular medium for which different parameters have been demonstrated, and standards have been developed, and those standards have been even uh, compared with the international standards as well. So these are the rules and regulations, and then these were revised in year 2000. And furthermore, you can observe that now we are talking about the section 6 of the Environmental Protection Act 1997. Earlier we talked about the ordinance, and now we are talking about the act. So keep this difference in mind. And here you can observe that these are the descriptions. So starting with for ambient air, and then we have some values for all these pollutants available in the ambient air. You can check in them and then you can compare. So national standards for drinking water, you can compare it with the WHO standards. And so mostly the parameters are not going to be much changed from the international standards, because the parameters will be similar in one way or the other. But what will be the difference? It will be the requirements. So and those requirements vary from place to place. So uh, sometimes we have to bear with it. We have to relaxen the standards based on the existing levels. So we also need to work out the background values. So background values are those values which are not based on the standards, but those are actually the existing in the non-polluted areas. So we can also compare with that as well. So uh, that's how the standards are developed, but we are only now comparing the standards in view of the international standards and how they are linked in the act. These are the different standards being prepared. You can go through them. And finally, this is the national environmental quality standards for noise, which were prepared uh, in the year 2010, implemented that time. And so there is a time frame of 2 years almost, so as to so that the specific components like residential, commercial, industrial and silence zone, they can prepare for getting themselves within the limits as defined by the standards. So this is the list of rules and regulations which have been implemented. So if you want to check what kind of rules and regulations are in practice nowadays, this is the document which will help you. So please go through this document as well, and it will define what environmental rules and regulations are in practice nowadays. So you can check it by just finding it here. Like Pakistan Environmental Protection Agency is the implementing organization, and the rules and regulation title is ban on the manufacturing and import of the uh, uh, sale and purchase, storage and usage. And then the compounding of offenses and its implementation, again it's the responsibility of park EPA, and how it is going to regulate. It will be imposing penalty. So there is a huge list. Please go through this list thoroughly and get prepared for its implementation. So that's all for this lecture, and it's quite a vast topic about the standards. So we have NEQS. At the same time, now we have provincial environmental quality standards. At the same time, we have US EPA standards. At the same time, we have WHO standards. At the same time, we have World Bank standards. So all these standards are existing in our uh, standard, in our organizations are implementing it. So all it depends on which we are going to follow. So mainly it depends upon the area with which you from where you belong, so that we can implement the relevant standards. So NEQS are a mandatory requirement for any organization or industry while working in Pakistan to follow those standards. Similarly, if we are working in an international environment, maybe in that case we need to focus on the international standard as well. We need to observe those standards as well to meet their requirements. So that's all for today's lecture, and next time we will revise these standards. As I have requested you to please go through the existing standards, rules and regulations, and so that we can discuss it in our class. Mostly our this syllabus is complete. Next time, or in the next lecture, we will be trying to find out the policies and strategies which can improve or which we can implement, and in addition to our these laws and regulations. Thank you very much.